Welcome to The Teacher's Story. I'm Jackie Scully. This is a podcast to elevate teacher voice. In this program, you will hear teachers sharing their journey into this profession and their ideas for education. I'm kicking it off Teacher Appreciation Week, which starts May 2nd. This is about honest, vulnerable, inspiring storytelling. It's a time and a space for teachers to share their ideas for the future of education. Teachers are beautiful beings who give their heart and soul to their community. They're innovators, they're inspirational, not only to children, but to the people around them. And they deserve to share their voice. So welcome to The Teacher's Story. Enjoy. Hi, welcome to The Teacher's Story. I'm Jackie Scully, and today we have Vinny Wagjiani with us. And Vinny is out of England, and really neat. We met through a Facebook group centered around a book that we're reading called Energize, which is a great book, by the way. And I just really enjoyed meeting in such a way and then jumping on a Zoom call and saying, tell me a little bit about your background. So Vinny is a detective, and he's also a coach and mentor. He has a coaching company called Kardia Coaching and Mentoring. He works with children to build confidence and resilience. Also, we shared lots of ideas how his work could be then brought to the classroom and how teachers themselves can be coaches and to work on some of those other skills that are outside of just curriculum. So I'm so happy to have you on today, Vinny.
Thank you very much. That was a humble introduction. Thank you.
So my first question for you is, what inspired you to get into this work with coaching with kids?
So I think it really started when I was probably in my sort of darkest moments in policing, where there was a period where I was really thinking about leaving policing for good, not because I hated policing in itself, but just the external criticism that impacted not only on my mental health, but just people I was seeing around me. And it was a senior officer that sort of pulled me aside and pushed me to go through some leadership programs. And it was through those leadership programs where I began to learn some of the ingredients around leadership, ingredients around how to empower people. And my previous force were looking to incorporate coaches within the policing working environment. So I was fortunate to get trained up and qualified externally through coaching, and as a result began to practice that theory within the policing culture, just to help people develop and grow within the policing context. And I'd always look back with all the sort of successes that I was seeing in front of me as I was coaching police officers, police staff within the organization, and went, if all of these people and myself had these skills when we were younger, what would we have turned out to be in the future? And that really sort of became the foundation of me beginning to read more, learn more, and then understand the sort of children's psychology of it, which has helped me greatly, because when I think like a kid, my creative abilities as a detective sort of get enhanced anyway. So I learn a lot from the sort of children and young people I coach. So I began to reshape the coaching style I had so I can sort of translate that to coaching children and young people. The transition was a little bit sticky because kids didn't really understand the concept of coaching. They didn't really know what it was all about. So working with them to sort of find out what they really wanted to do was probably the biggest hurdles, and then getting them used to, I'm listening and they're doing a lot of talking and I'm asking a little questions, worked out to be something spectacular, I would say.
That's wonderful. And I think this message of, this is great for just young people to hear, that your career path is not just this linear one, size fits all, right? Like you can constantly be inspired to go in a new direction, which you did because you wanted to get into this coaching, and then it took you into wanting to coach children. And I love that because it's so different, right? Like, most people, they're like, so you're interviewing someone who's a detective and now they're a student coach, right? What does that look like? But your life could be so many different roles. And I think it's just about these moments that we have where we're truly inspired to want to go into maybe more something that's more meaningful, or like we feel like it's more part of our authentic self. So I love that. What were some of your early like experiences with working with children? And the age group, is it like, I think it was like 6th, 7th grade, like middle school, or is it younger than that?
So I've coached as young as 6.
Okay.
And taken coaching up to as old as 18, transitioning into university. And I do coach university students as well. I guess where it all really started was through my detective work.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a child protection detective.
Mm.
So I've seen the sort of real deprived side of how children are treated. And as a result of learning around children and the vulnerabilities that they've experienced, and learning how to interview them under serious conditions, that ability to talk to children has always grown and always been quite comfortable with. So helping the children from that sort of socio-demographic group has always been one of my sort of sources of fulfillment. So being able to see children who've probably not got the same kickstart as many others, and going into either a school or going into an individual community group where I can have at least one impact with one child, and they can have that sort of domino effect of they've been able to get inspired and do something, so they'll go and do the same. It's almost like pyramid selling, I guess.
But for the good.
Yeah, absolutely.
What were some of the like techniques that you use with your students? Or I know you even said like some of this was work that you did with your own children and some of like the books that kind of inspired you, but just to kind of get more into like the actual like coaching session or what you do with your students.
So the sort of context all really started with sort of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, written by Stephen Covey Sr. And I then discovered, as I was learning his material, that his son had written a book for children. And subsequently written a book for teenagers, and the context around each of the habits and the 7 habits that are within the book allowed a structure for me to have coaching style conversations with my 6-year-old, because we were talking the same language but in different levels. And being able to talk about habit 1 from a child's perspective, and then she can see habit 1 from an adult's perspective, and then we were sort of cross-pollinating our sort of ideas and thoughts, and being able to have very good conversations. And that grew, and unbeknown to me, certainly with my 6-year-old, she was at school, there was school council elections, and she wrote her own speech. She stood in front of the class, presented her own speech, got elected for a school council leader, and then just casually comes back and says, "I'm a school council leader." And we began talking and realized that a lot of our one-to-one sessions were not only giving her confidence, but they were growing her as an individual to think differently, to think with a mind of leadership, to think with a mind of being in service to others, i.e. her class. And that slowly began to grow and grow the more she sort of went up the year groups. And now in secondary school, we're revisiting the whole concept, and we're going through the teenage version of the 7 habits, which allows us to not only able her to grow in another level, but allows her to self-regulate as a teenager. So she's able to navigate through the teenage years and manage those emotions, manage those relationships that are happening at school, whether they're I'm your friend today and I'm not your friend tomorrow type discussions that sort of take place. So there's very little parent supervision we now need to do with her when she's going through those emotional periods at school, through friendship breakdowns and new friendships that are being created. So I think some of the things that come out from those coaching sessions, and like you mentioned earlier, is building the resilience, the robustness. There was a book I read by a Navy SEALs called Attributes, by a guy called Rich Divney, and within there are broken down attributes that they've used for the selection process of the Navy SEALs, and those do include things like robustness, resilience, adaptability, team ability, humor, and all sorts of other elements. And we began to go through those things because we began to discover, and like the book says, schools can teach skills, but they can't teach attributes. And those attributes can only be learned from within. But how does someone learn something from within if someone's not there to coach them through the learning? So I found bringing those out of my daughter and now my son going through the same thing has begun to make them a little bit more resilient, has begun to get them to build relationships at school, have those connections where they can identify and create new ideas, and they're constantly learning rather than being static.
And I think starting at such a young age is so important because, you know, by the time, like you said, you're in secondary, you're able to problem solve on your own, right? You're able to be independent and, you know, manage your emotions, manage your relationships, which ultimately will really set you up for being a successful young adult. I think we are, especially in America, but you probably see this in England as well, we're so driven towards product, like productivity. And it's not really about like, how are you as a person, right? And like, how are you thriving as a person? Because you thriving will only be a benefit to society, like the workplace, your relationships, community outreach, whatever that may be. And I think that really needs to be a focus in schools as well. And I know we'll kind of talk about that towards our last part. But during the pandemic, I feel like this was, and we're still in it, but we're in this time of, we're seeing kind of those holes, or we're seeing the issues that maybe haven't been addressed in schools or with parenting, with raising our children. Have you found in your coaching business, like the pandemic, showing you any kind of new aha moments, or what are your takeaways from this time that maybe have lended itself to the work that you're doing?
I think certainly coaching probably wasn't recognized as something that was routinely available for children or a standard practice to work with children and young people. And the more I began to work within the industry, began to realize actually there's quite a lot of children coaches around and doing some absolutely amazing work. But what it did bring to surface is the lack of confidence that children and young people generated through or created, I guess, through the pandemic period where lockdown was in place, isolation was in place. So these skills around face-to-face connection wasn't happening, and relationship building wasn't happening. The ability to talk to other human beings face-to-face wasn't happening. So when everything went down and schools were coming back and emerging, there was this void. Kids just didn't know how to connect. They didn't know how to speak to each other. Some of these children who were just starting school, primary school, had never met each other for the first year and a half, 2 years. They're in a phase of education where a little bit more advanced from the play part of education and straight into mainstream, and they're just getting to learn about the kids around them and the relationship building. And I think that was probably one of the biggest gaps that COVID created.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking like, I teach psychology, and one subfield we talk about is positive psychology. And I think a lot of this kind of connects to this idea of coaching, particularly like young people, because a lot of psychology for a long time was all about almost like, well, at least in the clinical sense, like reactive, right? Like here I'm at this point, I have anxiety, I have depression, and we still have a lot of students that go to counselors or therapists, which, that's definitely needed. And those professionals are there to help children. But here's another look at it, just like with positive psychology, is like, how do we take what you already have and dive in deep to your own, attributes and really grow that and make you more robust, make you more resilient, so that when those life challenges happen, going through a pandemic or whatever that may be, you have these tools, right? You have these abilities to be able to overcome. So instead of being reactive or looking at like after the fact, it's like we're setting you up for success. We're setting you up. Doesn't mean that we are human beings, we're not robots. Like it doesn't mean we won't have hard times or be sad, and I explain this to my students, like people go through depression. You don't have to be clinically depressed, but people go through that. It's just part of the waves of your life. um
Absolutely.
yeah, and it's just like, but how can you overcome, like allowing yourself to go through an emotion, go through a time period, but now have these skills and strategies to overcome that. So I really see a lot of this coaching kind of tied to positive psychology in that way. And I mean, we saw it not as dire in my school, but I have friends who teach in all different public schools around the country, and just reading it, in the news, and, hearing accounts of students coming back in person last year. They struggled with, socializing, but they also struggled with like how to concentrate and like focus and like kind of manage their schedule and manage their workload. Like they were basically, and I teach high school, so I'm kind of coming through the teenager side. They were basically on their own for a year and a half. Like if
Mm.
they were virtual since March 2020, they were on their own. If their parents were working at home virtual or maybe still working in person, they were kind of just like doing it all on their own. And not all of them had the tools to be able to do it successfully. And then when they came back to school, they're kind of like, you can kind of see they're stumbling along, trying to figure out like,
Absolutely.
how do I do this again? Like, how do I work with other people? And I know, particularly in some cases, some grade levels, they saw a little bit more of a behavior issue in schools, because I just don't think students were ready for it. So I could see like, especially going through a time period like the pandemic, and I would not want to see that happen again, but we're going to go through other crises, right, in our future, that a student coach like yourself, while parents are working and busy, could really help that child kind of, again, thrive and get through a really difficult time period, and not just necessarily, you can't put it all on the school to do it, and parents are busy working. There's kind of this other person in their life, right? There's this mentor that has their back. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and I mean, all the great stuff I talk about my daughter, we still get the downs as well. So I do need to put it on record that we will have challenging moments. But we tend to find, I guess, and I've spoken to quite a lot of parents where they have that struggle of, whilst they're trying to have that parent leadership style or that coaching style, their children just won't connect with them because they're going,
Mm.
certainly through the teenage years, of going through that transition of separating from the
Mm-hmm.
parental bond and then forming relationships outside that parental bond. So they won't necessarily want to connect or share some of the things that are happening. Whereas I found, certainly coaching the transition years going from primary school to secondary school, the children are able to say a little bit more to myself, and we're able to talk through and process some of the emotions and strategies that are able to take from the transitions that they're doing, the unknowns that are going to be happening at school, and just formulate a plan for them to get ready for success in the next sort of chapter of their lives, which they're reluctant to do. And
Mm-hmm.
having spoken to the children, have openly said, I wouldn't share this with my mum. I wouldn't share
Yeah.
this with my dad
Yeah.
at all. And it's around some of the emotions that they feel that they're not confident enough to share, which is a tragedy
Mm-hmm.
in its own self, where we should try and as parents, encourage our children to sort of bring emotions to the surface and help them dissect them on a table and say, well, what does this look like and feel like to you? Right, let it pass through you. Don't forget about it. Don't bury it, but just let it pass through you so you can able to process it and manage it in future. And that's where the resilience comes in. That's where the robustness comes in when you're sort of strengthening these children, especially now, more so having gone through the COVID period.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point about the parent-child relationship and how it changes. We talk about that in my psychology class too. It's pretty developmental. Like, I mean, it's going to happen. We've all gone through it. You hit like 13 and you're all of a sudden you're like, I had nothing to do with my parents, and it's your friend group is really what you focus on. But then if you could have that other kind of, again, adult mentor where it's kind of like in between, and not taking anything away from, like, obviously we want parents to have a close relationship with their children, but just sometimes it's really difficult if parents are working a lot. Like, I grew up in a household where my parents, I had a mom that's a nurse and my dad that's a social worker. They worked a lot. Like, it sometimes is just the reality. And so it's great to have this kind of middle person. I think in my school, we kind of have that role, obviously not so, one-on-one in depth with a child, but we're an advisor as well. So I have a class of 10 students that are just my advisees, and we meet once a week. And we usually meet more as like a group, and we do like a group kind of like session, but then we do have time where we meet one-on-one, and it allows us to kind of check in. So that's kind of like a little bit of that coaching is there. It's obviously not the same as like someone who's there meeting with you on a regular basis. But I know a lot of schools don't even have that type of program, because I've worked in public school as well. And we would have maybe an advisory class in middle school, but then I didn't see that in high school. And that's really when you need it too. So kind of getting into my last part with the work you're doing and how maybe you could see this being brought to schools, like on, say a whole level, like all schools having some kind of coaching training for teachers, or how we can use some of these, tools and strategies in school. So what are some of your ideas for that?
So one of my other roles, aside from policing, is I'm a chair of school governors. So that allows me a very direct link, certainly with the senior leadership team, but also to get a greater understanding of what's happening at primary school level. And I get an insight at secondary school level from my work as a child protection officer. So I'm able to speak to a number of schools within the district or area. So I'm able to take some of my learning, work with the head teacher, the headship team, and start playing with a little bit of ideas to firstly start at the top level. So if we can get the confidence and the I would say, the confidence of the senior leadership team, that coaching is a skill, and you can freely use it amongst each other to grow as individuals, as a senior leadership team, and then begin to weave that down into the teaching team. So as senior leaders, they're coaching their teaching staff to grow as individuals. Not only does that provide a benefit to the individual teachers, but it also strategically provides succession planning to leaders ready to take on roles should someone retire or leave. So then the next stage is something that we're really looking at exploring through this term coming and onwards, where we're looking at trying to get the skills of the teachers to be able to have a coaching style mindset. So rather than teaching the staff with a one size fits all, they're coaching with a bespoke style of learning the individual nuances of a child, and pretty much sort of tapping into the hormones that give the happiness in children. So giving a bit of a dopamine hit, or an oxytocin hit, serotonin hit, or an endorphin hit, depending on what sort of activities are taking place, and suddenly sparking life into a child where they're getting addicted to learning, or they're building these relationships in classrooms that are giving that oxytocin hit. And the happier the children are in the school, the more productive they come, because the distractions aren't of boredom and tiredness, and you'll begin to start seeing the results academically sort of go up with them as well.
Yeah, I think this is a really innovative way of looking at schooling and just teaching in general, because I think the major problem we see, and this is why we have a lot of teachers leaving the profession, at least in America, is that there's too much on everyone's plate. And that was even more so during the pandemic, and nobody's taking anything off, and nobody's giving any space for these teachers to do that kind of work. So like, first, structurally, there needs to be less on teachers' plate and more, like you said, that individual attention of like, how do I coach a teacher and really see your strong attributes and have that continue to grow, and then give that to then the children when you have now time and space to really work with them. So I just think that there needs to be more of a structure first of like having the teachers really just focus on their students, right? Like not all these duties, or not having a class of like 35 students. Like many public schools here have classes that are over 30. And then you have like 5 classes. So you have like 150 students on your roster. How can you actually do that individual work? And then if you don't have an advisory program, so I said this on my last episode, that we need to have more time with our kids one-on-one, and that needs to be a structural change, at least in the public school system. I'm fortunate because I work in a private school. I transitioned from public to private. It came out of the recession. It was more just like I'm needing to get a job, and it was very frustrating in the public school system. But then I fell in love with it because smaller class sizes, advisor role where I'm actually meeting and getting to know, some students.
And what are your class sizes?
So this year they're actually much smaller than they have been. I would say average have been anywhere from 15, 20 max.
Oh, wow.
But I have some classes this year that are 10. So
Wow.
yeah, and then I have an advisor group, which every upper school teacher, middle school as well, has an advisor group of like anywhere from 8 to 10 students, which you meet with once a week, sometimes twice a week, because sometimes you'll have another additional time period with them. So it's just so, I know it's hard in some of these big schools, but like I went to a really big public school, and now there's 3 in that area, in that district. So it's better. But I graduated with like 900 students. I was lost in high school, and then, my parents worked a lot. That was just their jobs, right? I just didn't even like know who I was. Like it was just a really hard time, and we didn't have an advisor class. And so if we want to see how we tackle some of these issues with like mental health, with students falling through the cracks, not saying this is all about how this is tied to our gun shootings in schools, but there's an aspect of people falling through the cracks, no one having their eye on them or seeing them and caring about them. And then they're just like out there on like the web or the dark web. And then in our country, you could just go get a gun almost anywhere in some places. Like it's the gun safety laws, but it's also a culture. Like there's this whole factory system of like, just pump all these kids through school, teach all these subjects, and if parents are overworked or they're busy, like these kids are just falling through the cracks.
Yeah, and I think we get something similar, and when it's probably similar to like interstate schools where they're busy, there's not enough time. I think it's the same within us. So like a London urban school compared to a rural county school, you'll see different dynamics. We've recruited a teacher at our school that worked in an urban London school and now coming to a rural school, and it'll be interesting to see how her journey and her perspective of the 2 different schools are when she begins this year. But the cracks are certainly the biggest things, and how we identify them. One of the things that our school has begun to bring in is around the journey of a child throughout the whole schooling period. So from reception to year 6 in the primary stages, they begin to have a record that's kept. So for every subject. So this never used to happen, and it's just a recent introduction with our school. So every subject, they will be reported on by the teacher throughout the year. And this is what we found quite useful during the COVID period, where the teachers were inputting their information and their assessments on the children throughout the COVID period. And that was capturing data, data that was allowing all the subject leads throughout the year to understand what the student or the pupil was going through and what they were learning, and what their learning gaps were, more importantly. Not only in the core subjects, but in the secondary and tertiary subjects, music, drama, art, etc., all fundamentally important, or equally as important as the core subjects. But when it came to lockdown coming down and kids transitioning back into the school period, our senior leadership team and the teaching staff were able to be very proactive and analyze the data to be able to identify what the general overall school deficiency was and the gaps were in all of the subjects, break it down into year groups, so they were able to then identify what needs needed to be done per year. And then even better, they were able to identify per child. So being able to identify per child through the year group, they were able to then set up programs before school even started to be able to go, right, we're parachuting into this group, which is an additional source of teachers that will allow them to come back up to the start line so that they can then start the race equally amongst all the others, rather than start at school and they're 200 yards behind the sort of start line and they're going to struggle to finish at the same time. So this database and data was very much used to a good purpose, rather than beating teachers on the with a stick and say your kids aren't performing, you need to be doing this, and this. So yeah, the data certainly helps.
I really like this approach. That's really amazing. I would love to see that in our schools, because I think often we think of data, we think of test scores or just like the grade, but I think there needs to be more collection of actual narrative data too. Like, these teachers are spending time with these students. We do pretty extensive comments with the grade, even in the upper school, but just for like the first half of the year. And we're trying to see how we want to continue to do that through the whole year. It is very time consuming. So again, going back to give the teachers time, they need space to do this work. But that narrative data, and looking at not just an A or a B or an F, right? Or just looking at a test score, right? Standardized test, carries through, and you can analyze it and do so much more with it. Then you can see patterns in the whole grade, and then with each child, and then you can actually then formulate like a program or a strategy initiative to really help those students, up and succeed. So I think there does need to be more tracking in that way, and not just looking at data as the way we always thought about it, with just scores, but data as far as what do we see with
Absolutely.
this group of kids. Yeah.
I think from the quantitative aspect, you'll be able to see performance scores, and you can grade yourself against other schools, especially if it's at a national level. But the qualitative stuff is way more powerful when it comes to transitioning from year group to year group, where teachers have an insight. We encourage our teachers to talk to each other in different year groups. So the reception year will talk to the nursery year as well as year one. What are the groups coming up to you not being able to be at a level at, so I can make sure I'm concentrating at it, and then speaking to the year group below and saying, we need this from you, so that when they come to our year group, they're ready to do X, Y, and Z. And that goes through the whole tier system from reception all the way to year 6. So there's always an interaction between each of the teachers and their professional discussions. So we're able to create that circle of trust, so that they can lean into that vulnerability of, this is what's happening in your class, or this is the style of teaching. You need to be able to bring this. I will make sure I can spend some time with you, so that we can work together to develop some strategies, so that we can overcome some of the challenges. And I think that's where we're sort of really seeing some changes.
Mm-hmm.
The other element is giving the teachers the autonomy to come and speak to us as governors of the school, where just before the summer period had finished, we'd done a speed dating type event. So all the subject leaders within the school were able to display their subject, what they do, and what they're planning on doing. And they were giving a briefing to each of the school governors. And then we would ask them questions, and they would ask back, and we would almost have a little coaching style conversation. So if we would say things like, if no money was a barrier, and what would you like to do? What would you like to see in your subject? And they would start beginning to come out with all of these ideas, which would all get recorded, but allow us as a governing body to then start looking at it from a strategic perspective and go, there's some brilliant ideas. Some of these are cost neutral. We can make this happen without spending any money at all. And some of this may require a little bit of funding, and we're able to see from our position how we can redistribute the funding so that the ultimate aim is to find the best way to educate and nurture children so that it can be the best that it can be.
And I talked about this early on in this podcast, is that there does need to be more teacher autonomy and more like round circle kind of round table discussions, because it's still in many places. And again, I'm in a little bit of a different situation. I think there is a lot more conversations. The pandemic kind of stifled that. I think that's going to come back. But a lot of places are like top down, and there isn't a lot of teacher voice, even as just like a department, right? So like teachers in a department, they can go to their department head. They can talk about like the things they want to do as a department, the ideas they have, maybe things that will be programs that they want to initiate. And then that head could go, like you said, right to the top and have these presentations. And it gives a lot of respect back to the teachers. And that's one thing we need to work on in our society and culture, is that teachers feel like they get everything, they're just told what to do. And especially during the pandemic, like, here's all the duties you have to do, but not asked. They're not asked, like, what do you need? What do you need from us? Because there needs to be the mindset of, we're all working together, right?
Absolutely.
We're all working together, and the goal is to benefit the children. I mean, that's ultimately what we're doing. But if you don't have that respect for each other, then the system starts to break down. And that's kind of like what we're seeing.
And I think beyond that, and just asking the teachers, we in our school go that one step further. So we ask the kids. So what I mentioned earlier, my daughter was a school council leader. Well, that's replicated in every year group and every classroom. And there's two representatives that get together on behalf of their classes and formulate ideas, what they want to see the school look like, what they want the school to feel like, what activities and equipment do they need. And they pool all of that together, and with the support of some of the teachers, make that into a presentation that will get presented to the school board of governors by the students. So they will come in and present, these are the things we want. So we see lived experience and lived stories from these children around the passion. If we had this, we could do this. And as a group, I don't think there's been any that we've declined, but we've been able to materialize their thoughts and ideas into reality. And that really changes the dynamics of how belonged a child feels at school. And when they feel belonged, they're going to produce more, and they're going to get involved more because they're being listened to. So
absolutely.
that only sort of improves the enthusiasm of the teacher that's in the classroom. So they want to get engaged. So they then get excited. And then our 360 speed dating style conversation that we have with each of the subject leads follows the same sort of pattern. And then the same thing goes with the senior leadership team. So we're always looking at ways of being innovative, trying different things, looking at the children's ideas. I think Richard Branson said some of the best ideas he came up with was when he thought like a child. when he fought like a kid. And it's so true. You know, you take away all of the environmental barriers. I remember when I was a kid, and if I wanted to do something, if I was bored, I'd go out into the garden or go into the alleyway, and I'd be able to build something out of nothing, and then it will give me hours and hours of enjoyment.
Yeah.
You know, fail to tap into that creativity.
Yeah. This sounds like a really beautiful school culture. So I'm so happy you're sharing these ideas, because I think our listeners and just myself, we could take away and see like how we can maybe, you know, have some of these strategies in our schools. The student voice is really important. I mean,
Absolutely.
We have a generation that, you know, maybe not everywhere, but they feel that their voices aren't heard, or that they're not empowered, and they get very like disengaged in school. And if they can have this program where they can come up with ideas, go to their representatives in their class, and then actually present to the board, you know, not just like present to a teacher or maybe present to like a director or principal, but like, you know, all the way up that is making the decisions for the whole entire school. That is so empowering. And then they have more buy-in, because then they're fully part of this community. I like the word you mentioned about like belonging. So like in America, like DEI is like the big initiative in workplaces and schools for like diversity, equity, inclusion. But now the next piece is belonging. So we have in our director role, and we have a committee, it's DEIB. So the idea is we need to take it a step further, because yes, you can have diversity, you're promoting that equity, you know, how is everyone getting what they need? Inclusion, how do we include, you know, people in all different groups? And we have great initiatives around that. But then the B for belonging is like, does the child feel like they're really part of this system? And when they can use their voice and share their ideas, and then there's programs that come out of that, they're like, wow, that really worked. And how amazing for them to then be young adults and have that kind of initiative, right?
Yeah, and I think it comes just basically from the formula. Like diversity is the numbers that sort of sit at that table,
right.
And the inclusion part is allowing those numbers to have a voice, and the belonging part is for that voice to be heard. And that's what separates the whole DEI element of it. It's that voice being heard, and being very transparent. Like there will be things that they will propose that the board will say, we are unable to do this because, and we would give them a reason. We are able to do this, and here it is. This is what it's going to look like. And I think that allows not a revolutionized way of sort of building the school together, but it's an evolution, because everyone's part of the process, and it's growing organically. So when change happens, they're part of the change. And when you're part of the change, you're not putting something on there, they're growing it, they're growing together with the change. So it's not as stressful.
That. Yeah, I love that. You're all part of this change. You're all part of seeing a system grow together. And I just think that could transform the way that we have schooling. And then you have respect for the teachers, respect for the students, and you're working as a team. Everyone feels like super excited to be part of that team, right? Instead of like, students just feeling like, I'm going to school because I have to, or, you know, like it's the law that tells me I have to be here. My parents tell me I have to be here. But they actually come thinking I can actually bring up an idea and it might go somewhere, right? And I might transform this whole, you know, place and be part of that. And then they go on to be young adults and come back and they could say, oh, I'm still part of that change that happened there. You know, there's a legacy.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that, and you use the word respect, and that forms part of our school's core value. So the school kids, the teachers, the senior leadership team, and the governors all have to read this and all have to be embodied by it. And respect is the center part of what we call the 6 R's. And around respect are 6 separate R's that the whole of the school and the community work by. And the first one is being reflective. So all the decisions you make, you're being reflective around whether you've done something good and why was it so good? If you didn't do something so good, what could you do better next time? Resourceful, so like mimicking nature, we sort of try and present it in wasps, bees, ants being quite resourceful around doing their work. Relationships is the third one. Building relationships with each other, with the teaching staff, and with the senior leadership team. Being responsible about their actions was the fourth one. Risk taking. There's been an element which I've seen a number of schools stepping away from risk taking. Our head teacher has just leant straight into it. So those snowball fights that other schools are reluctant to have, certainly in England, or those trips away where they think that it might be a little bit risky, we allow that to take place to give them an element of risk taking, because it's through risk taking where they learn about failures and how to utilize those failures and embrace them and lean into them. And it doesn't matter if you have 5 failures before an success. It often is the case. You know, you'll have those failures. So understanding that failure isn't a negative thing, it's a positive thing. It's a step to getting to your success. And that all sort of comes with the resilient aspect of it. So the sort of 6 R is the resilient aspect. So all of those 6 R's wrap around the respect, making sure that the kids and the school staff are working within the sort of boundaries of rules and regulations and stuff like that, but they've still got the autonomy to take a little bit of risk, to do a little bit of relationship building, to have that resilience when things go down. I mean, resilience was a big thing post-COVID, teaching staff just to get out of what we were in and then move forward with what we had. So we found our values certainly held the school together, and because we all live by those values, right from the school governing team all the way down to the pupil, I think it helps. And I think where I saw it come to real great power was we had a teacher of 10 years moving on and going to another school closer to her family elsewhere. And it was on the sports day where whole school went swarming when they found out around this teacher, to be able to just show the connectivity, the power that the teachers have had on the school. And we had previous kids who were helping out, who had come to the school, go round and rap, and we get them come back. We have secondary schools inform our head teacher that they know they've got a student from our primary school because of the behaviors and the attributes they present at their secondary school.
Wow, this is great. I just wrote down the 6 R's because I love it. And the idea of it centered around respect. The risk-taking one, I think, is really key. And this idea of, and we try to teach this with our students too, that failure is kind of part of the process, right? And it's actually like you want to fail because you want to keep trying, and that builds your resilience too. Because when you get to that success, when you get to that moment, like it just feels like you work so hard for it. But like it also helps you with just problem solving, and it helps you with just trying things out, like going back to that kid mindset of like, well, I'm going to just try this out. I'm going to be imaginative. I'm going to experiment. And, you know, I think just having that mind shift of that failure is a good thing, right? And it's part of it. And you have to go through maybe many failures until you get to that successful moment. But I think we're at a time now, coming out of at least like the COVID protocol, where maybe some of that risk taking can come back to the school. Like, what do we want to try out? What do we want to experiment with? I know that's something that I want to be doing more in my classroom. And like, what are those initiatives that kind of got put on the back burner over the last 2 years? Like, let's bring those back and see, you know, how we want to really kind of shape the school moving forward. So I'm really excited about this school year, because I think we can get to this like new place of maybe risk taking, trying new initiatives out, and not feeling like we're just weighed down by protocol, or like we're just trying to survive. We're just trying to do the best we can. I think now we're on the other side of it a little bit, not fully out, but we're getting there. So it's
and I
exciting.
think one of the things that we found, certainly with risk taking and that relationship element, um, we mustn't forget the special educational needs pupils that are integrated within the school. And what we're encouraging children to do is use the relationship R and the risk taking R to ask those questions around someone who's going for a neurodiversity journey through school and learn. And we have kids from various different, from autism, Asperger's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, all within the same sort of schooling community, but they're encouraged to integrate and learn from each other. Not only does that end up breaking down barriers, it allows certainly the pupils to support other pupils. That encourages a hit of serotonin. They feel important, they feel significant, and it's really just helping teachers sort of tap into those happy hormones and being able to use a style of questioning that is attributed to that individual child. So using metaphors with a kid that loves computer games to be able to direct them to do something is far more powerful than a bland sentence to say, can you go and do this?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and the integration is important with special education. I know growing up that it was always very separate. And then students feel like they're, if they have a learning plan, like they're other, but integrating all of these, children together and learning about their differences, like everyone learns in different ways. And also what are the strengths, not just like, because I think often too, students will feel like they're kind of put into a box or have a label, like if they have ADHD or if they have dyslexia or, Asperger's or whatever that may be, and they always see it as a hindrance. But there's also really a lot of great, like, positive attributes that come out of those different,
we refer to it as gifts. I had a parent who posted a parent of a special needs child, and I wrote a little paragraph on their thing saying, I said, parent of a gifted child whose potential hasn't been realized by society.
Oh, right. That's so beautiful.
And it's around changing language, and a lot of it is around helping people understand if you continue to use the language which degrades the gift, then everyone's going to just be using that. Whereas if you enhance it as a gift, and they have got unique talents that all form when, part of a team, and if you're a leader and you're looking for talents, that person with dyscalculus or dyspraxia or dyslexia has a talent that's heightened within their potential because they're just wired differently.
Yeah, that's it.
That's all it is.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you think about sensory experience, if like one sense is kind of limited or dulled, it heightens other senses. And that's what we really want to also pay attention to, or what are those gifts that we have? What are those heightened, senses that we have, and really have the child see that, because then that's their potential. And then they feel that they can do whatever they want to do, like in their life. I love that.
And I think physical education was one of the biggest things we increased. There was a lack in the early part of the journey when the head teacher took on it. It was something she wanted to ensure. And as a governing body, we supported her to try and improve the facilities to the extent where I think there was an 80% increase in our special education needs children taking part in competitive sporting events. So we would go to events and there will be schools that will bring their elite players. We will bring our elite players, but we will bring in a second team and a third team of not so great players, giving them exposure to a competitive sport like they would never have had the opportunity to do. And it's through those exercises, through the education, physical education, that we began to then see individuals exhibiting certain types of talents. And then the teachers were then able to hone into that to then bring into the classroom. So they knew when a child was tired, they were able to then go and give them an exercise that they were very good at. So they were able to practice and become better at that physical sport, but then able to come back in, because if they didn't have an option to move, they would have probably lost it within the environment. So the very concept, I think I heard it somewhere, coin, move it or lose it.
Yeah.
And it absolutely works.
Yeah.
The moment you start moving, the moment you sort of start dissipating that tension and that anxiety, that probably will result in a tantrum moment taking place in the classroom. And it's those things that I think through hopefully the coaching style leadership that we're going to sort of bring into the school, they're able to start exploiting and tapping into.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great idea. I think movement is very important, and we've been on screens for 2 years. So this is the time to get outside, get moving. I like the idea of giving these children chances to play in these different kinds of sports, and often like sports, extracurricular, even if you're not like the top athlete or, top person in the musical, it's something that you like feel energized in. And then often those students do like better in school and they have more confidence.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
Music, exactly. Music is
Yeah.
probably, there's a lot of research that connects music to academic progress. And that was one of the things that the governing body and the head teacher really focused on, where our school in the summer periods would host a Leech Fest, which would be a music festival. And the music festival would include parents, teachers, and pupils singing, playing musical instruments. But what that would do was bring the community together to fundraise the money to build a music room, and then house the music room with all the different musical instruments, and then use the money to then buy in a teacher, because we can't get the funding from the state to pay for the teacher. So it would buy in a teacher to then resource a qualified person to teach music to everyone. So not just the talented people, but to everyone. So they've got an opportunity to play a musical instrument throughout their schooling year.
I love it. Well, I just love all these ideas. I love what you're doing, Vinny. Where could our listeners find you? Any information? I'll put it in the show notes as well that you'd like to share.
So from my coaching perspective, they can find me on the internet. It's Kardia Coaching and Mentoring Limited, and I can share the website with you so that we can give it. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always listening out and putting posts out to help parents, to help other leaders gain a better insight into exploring how best we can improve the education of our children and just help them grow and realize their dreams.
Thank you so much. And I will have that information in the show notes. I really enjoy this conversation. I think what you're doing at your school is phenomenal. I think we could definitely see that in all schools. I don't think it's that difficult to make these changes, and it really will help the whole ecosystem, and every member of that system to feel important and to feel like they have a voice. So thank you for being on the Teacher Story today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye. Have a good day.